Welcome back, and thank you for joining A Shark's Perspective. Do you want to be happier, healthier, and enjoy your job more? Well, most people would obviously say yes in their quest to be the kings and the queens of the business world. Yet, one of the biggest failings for many people, more often than how well they do in their marketing or advertising efforts, for example, is how well they perform in getting along with people, especially at work. It's the number one environment where most people spend their time and meet new people. But are you maximizing those relationships? Are you focusing on your friendships? Shasta Nelson is a keynote speaker, leading expert on friendship and healthy relationships at work, and author with her third book now out called The Business of Friendship, Making the Most of Relationships Where We Spend Most of Our Time. And on this episode, we'll discuss how important friendships are at work, maximizing those relationships, how something like this has a business ROI rather than just an HR one. Loneliness, whether or not to consider hiring a best friend, the Thomas Crown Affair, autographing your own personalized can of Shasta Cola, Ross and Rachel, Chandler and Monica, friendship jewelry, and a lot more. So let's tune in to a friendship expert with your best friend Shark on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Shasta, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, tell us a little bit about your story to date and your background, how we got connected.
Yes, I would love to. In a 1 minute, let's see. I used to be a pastor. I transitioned into life coaching, and it was in both those jobs that I think gave me the eyes to start kind of asking questions about how connected people are and how supported they feel. And I kept hearing this ongoing similar theme of people striving in all these areas of their lives and yet still feeling largely disconnected or networked, but not really like they have any safe place to talk, to talk to someone. So that really is what, 12 years ago got me really looking at saying, why are so many people lonely, and why are so many people that are like awesome fun people, they don't fit the description, the stereotype we had of like lonely people. And that's really been the last 12 years, writing books, putting together events and resources, and studying and speaking to, and just really trying to help highlight loneliness as something that is more common than most of us talk about, and then what we can actually do about that, and how to feel more connected. And so my most recent book is how to do that in the workplace, but this
Yeah.
has been my thing for a long time now. Yeah.
Well, and I will give you an amen for that because I'm a believer, but I will also now feel guilty that I said a curse word before we started recording, which
Oh
I'll
no, that
edit
doesn't.
out of the
That's
show.
all
So,
welcome. Nope, no, do it.
but
Leave it in.
what made you make the change to move from pastor to author and speaker?
Well, it's interesting because looking back, they're not all that
No,
different. I
they're
mean,
not.
that's stuff I loved about pastoring. It was really when I got clear that what I was most passionate about was bringing people together, and that I believe most of us do our most important growth, if you will, in relationship. And so it really was like that was what brought me into being a pastor. I can look back and say that in my life up to that point was where community happened. That's where it was modeled to me. And now, most of us aren't going to those four walls. Most of us aren't going to those places. We're not going to the same places we used to for community. And so for me, it was okay, let me go out and see if I can make community happen in a place where we don't have to necessarily all agree with what we need to believe in, and have all the other trappings that can sometimes come with any religious organization. So for me, it got really clear that my bigger passion is helping people feel like they belong. And then I just took the skills that I learned as a pastor, which is, how do you bond small groups? How do you teach people to grow? How do you make people feel like they belong and build community? How do you make a difference in the lives of groups of people? How do you do marriage counseling? How do you help people keep relationships strong? And all that stuff suddenly was just like, oh, same stuff. And now I just speak and write on those similar themes. And yeah, and it's been, and I can't even tell you, Kenneth, how much I love it, because this is really for me. Get way more
It's a
excited
calling.
about
Yeah.
helping somebody. I
Yeah.
get way more excited about helping somebody belong. I mean, if we wanted to keep it in Christian language for a second, I take the text where it says, you'll know God by love. And like, that's the highest commandment. So to me, there's way more in scripture, and I don't teach this anymore. I mean, this isn't my thing anymore, but there's way more in scripture that talks about loving other people, loving each other, than there is on belief or praying or reading scripture and all those other things that sometimes are important. And yet my vision is like, how do we help people be connected to each other in meaningful ways?
So I had a chance to read your new book, The Business of Friendship. Fantastic, loved it. Very easy read. Making the most out of our relationships, where we spend most of our time, and some of the times with a lot of the shows, I have to be the yin to the yang, a little devil's advocate, if you will, to push back. But I got to be
Yeah, yeah,
honest,
yeah.
I was struggling a little bit to make, friends be a
Yay!
controversial subject. So, really, what sort of inspired you to take this twist on friendship, if you will, as a book?
Yeah, well, and I love hearing that because a lot of people, 30% of people are not so sure we should have friends at the
Yeah.
workplace. So it is probably my more controversial book if you'll have it.
Yeah.
But yeah, to me, my passion coming into it was the fact that I teach there's three requirements that have to be present in every healthy relationship. And when I go out and I've been teaching for years, and I always ask audiences, after I teach the three, and we can talk about that in a second, after I teach the three, I always say, which one is the hardest, which one do you think would make the biggest difference to your relationships? And I have them share in small groups, and then I have them come back in the large audience and do a hand raise. And without fail, 95% of the audiences list consistency, the consistent time, putting in enough time with their relationships as the reason for why, the one that would make the biggest difference for them feeling closer. And that one really has had me thinking for a long period of time, where we just aren't oriented in our culture to have the kind of time to put in with our friends. And as long as we keep it in the personal life bucket where it has to compete with, spending time with our kids and our families and our working out and our alone time and binge watching TV and just resting and doing chores and errands and eating and all that stuff, I was like, you really can't ask people, even if you could ask people to just do 1 more hour a week on friendship, it's not going to be the thing that makes the biggest difference. Like that 1 more hour isn't going to, like, all of a sudden make everything meaningful. And that's where I started saying this makes more sense to treat friendship as a life issue, not a personal life issue. And work really is like school was to us when we were kids. This is where we spend our time. It is actually the number one place we're making friends. And I was like, and yet we don't talk about it. We don't teach for it. We don't train for it. We don't talk about what healthy expectations are. And we don't really put the research out there that shows how much that benefits our companies for us to have friends. So really, it was my selfish motive was that more of us would live lives feeling more connected if we could maximize those relationships and not feel guilty for making friends at work, and that we actually would be more intentional to do that. So that was my secret way, and it just so happens to be that it's really good for the businesses too.
No, and it's got to be a fantastic topic to talk about in speeches. Everybody's going to resonate with this topic. That's why one of the books, there's so many
I
books
hope
that I
so.
read about SEO and, TV advertising and pay-per-click and everything else. And those don't resonate with most people, even a lot of folks at marketing conference. This resonates with everybody down to everybody's core. But also, I was thinking about, and this was covered loosely in the book, and this is not meant to be a social media book, but how do you think in particular social media has really impacted the relationships we have with others at work as well? If you'd written this book 10 to 12 years ago when you first started, this would be a totally different
Mhm.
book.
Totally. If I
If
wrote the
and
book,
it
if I
would
wrote the
not
book
necessarily be
this summer,
connected
it'd
by
be a
friends.
totally
Well,
different book.
that's true. But the lens that we filter some of those relationships once we leave the workplace as well
Yeah.
affects some of the stuff we do from 9 to 5, if you will.
Totally. Yeah, and to that point, actually social media can help us stay in touch with work friends in a way that we couldn't have done, 10, 12 years ago. It used to be that if you didn't actually get each other's phone numbers and call each other and kind of stay in touch with each other after you left a job, you would lose touch with each other. And now we have this ability to be a little bit more loosely connected and feel a little bit like we can just go on that LinkedIn and find you and connect with you, which can help. Social media, it's interesting. The research is kind of mixed on it. We are seeing some studies that are showing that it is hurting some relationships, but we're also seeing a lot of studies that are showing it can be very supportive, and you can find people and build relationships and build intimacy in ways that you couldn't without it. So social media, and I would argue the same three requirements that build close relationships are the same three things that build relationships if we're talking social media, or if we're talking advertising, or if we're talking marketing, or if we're talking sales. Like these, in my opinion, these same three things that we know are drivers of bonding and are drivers of connection are the same three things that if we practice well in any of those different spaces can serve us very well. So I think there's absolutely, to your point, great crossover to how this could improve social media.
Agreed. So there's the HR side that I sort of put my brain in this perspective. There's the HR side that I think a lot of people would think of going into reading a book like this. And I think I told you before, one of the things I really appreciated in your book was that you did offer a lot of research for, sales driven monkeys like me that are focused on business growth and things like that a lot of times. And there's a lot of type A's out there like me, some jerks, some, I'm not saying that was ever me, but there are people who stare at the numbers and sales and conversions and things like that.
Hmm.
But what I
Hmm.
would but what resonated for me with reading this and where I think this has additional impact is you also helped explain a lot of the costs of loneliness as well as how this could impact the bottom line in both a positive and a negative way if it's not touched upon. Could you kind of elaborate on how you see this impacting a business's ROI?
Yes, absolutely. And I love that that jumped out at you and landed for you because I by nature am not somebody who wants to like go get all the data
Yeah,
necessarily
yeah.
and just like hit people over the head with it. But it is so important because once we start seeing that it costs a company, like one of the big studies that, in my opinion, is not getting enough play, and this is Gallup. Uh, 2 decades. They have been saying this for 20 years, which is what probably blew my mind because I've heard them say that if you have a best friend at work, you are one of the best employees, that you are 7 times more engaged at work. And I was like, that would be impressive if it were even 2 times more engaged at work, but 7 times more engaged, which translates to fewer sick days, more comfortable brainstorming and coming up with creativity and research and development stuff, that you have fewer workplace accidents, that you're more likely to want to stay at your job and not have turnover. I mean, the list goes on and on. When you just say turnover, for example, the price tag on replacing employees is so high that when you start looking at the research that shows how much people want to stay at a job. And we all have this experience or know somebody who has had the experience where you could have the dream job on paper and all it takes is working with somebody that annoys you. And you're like, this job sucks. Like, get me out of this. It's hurting me. We say that we're like, it's causing me stress. It's hurting my health. And we know that. And that's one of the really impactful things here is that we care more about who we work with than actually what we're doing. We don't say that, but when we get tested for it on what makes us actually happier, we end up caring more about working with people we like and we want to be at that job, and we want them to succeed. We will cover for them. We will put in the extra hours for their success or to cover for each other. That stuff you can't pay people enough to want to do. There's an element there where this works in a company's favor absolutely on so many levels. And right now when we're looking at mental health and we're looking at burnout, if you actually pull back the kind of layers of burnout, you will see a direct correlation to how lonely somebody feels and how connected somebody feels. And when you look at resiliency and you want your front line and your essential workers to actually being able to recover from the stress quickly enough, that is also linked to how supported they feel and how much they feel like they can interact and kind of vent and dump and feel seen by each other. So this is really, when you look at almost every issue an HR person has, diversity and inclusion. I mean, you just go down the list of like whatever they're struggling with. I would argue that at the basis of it is a relational issue or a relationship health issue. And our ability to help train and inspire people to want to build healthier relationships at work will pay in huge dividends for any workplace that's willing to invest in that.
Yeah, well, in to that point, one of the things that I applauded President Trump for, I'm not going to make this political, but early on, he was talking about the mental health issue more so than he probably even talked about the virus itself. And most people don't tend to bring up suicide rates, depression, things like that. And when I heard him first talk about that, and as everybody started going remote, this is probably a good predecessor to the book. When you pull people away from those relationships that they're spending a majority of their time with, your person that you're sitting next to in a cubicle or in an office or whatever for 8 hours a day, and you rip that apart, that could
Yes.
affect them mentally just as much. It's not the same conversing with somebody on Slack when you never see them as opposed to, hey, what'd you do this weekend? Now, the what'd you do this weekend could take up too much water cooler time as we know as well. But I'm sure productivity, that's part of the reason that's not necessarily a ton of data on, but I'm sure we'll see it over time that pulling the friendship piece away from a proximity standpoint, which we'll talk about later in the book, had some effect. But when writing this book, did you specifically write it from a business angle, or was it more of an HR lens focus? And again, the reason I keep bringing that up is because I thought this book was really impactful from a business standpoint not just an HR standpoint. And I've read a lot of books that are self-help like that, and they always focus on the inner you. But I looked at this book and I thought this could help me as an employee or as a manager, and that's
Hmm.
what kept jumping out at my, again, my type A singular point of view brain, small brain. So
Yeah, well, I appreciate hearing it. I really do because I struggled with finding who was I
yeah,
writing this to initially. I initially thought I was writing it to leadership and HR and managers. And then as I was writing it, I was like, no, no, this isn't feeling right.
yeah.
I actually
Well, that's
want to
where it
write
gets
it
too
to
fluffy
yeah,
sometimes.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, and it just starts feeling like those aren't necessarily, that leaves the rest of us feeling a little victimized, like I have to work for a company that therefore does all of these things. If I actually want to take care of my health, then I would much rather say, what can we do as individuals to show up in whatever workplace we have and make the very best of it. And so I changed it. I mean, I would say there's chapter 2 where I talk about all the research of how it benefits a company. I would say that's written to like the HR and the managers, like this matters. But it's also written to the rest of us to say, hey, we don't need to feel guilty for this. This benefits them. Excuse me. And the rest of the book, I would really argue, is mostly for the average person who's saying, I want to feel more connected in life. And my examples are workplace, but I would even argue that everything I teach in this book is the same stuff you would need to know to build healthier
oh yeah.
relationships in your home life and in your personal life. So to me, it's kind of like, how do I write this where it's in the place where we spend most of our time? And interesting, Kenneth, my other books, publishers wanted them targeted to women, and friendship has often been seen as a women's issue. And one of my big motives for writing this book is to get it in the hands of men, and they're more likely to read business marketing books. And so let's get this in the hands of people who are not traditionally drawn to friendship books, and yet 61% of us are reporting feeling lonely on a somewhat regular basis. And so something about the way we're doing life right now is not meeting our emotional and relational needs. And so we've got to be willing to say, we have to look at this differently and do this differently. And you're bringing up the productivity piece earlier. It's interesting. The research that I was able to find actually shows that, like, for example, during a team meeting or during time together, if they actually take time to do sharing and connection, it doesn't take away. It feels like we're wasting time before we get to the agenda or what we need to do. But the studies show that those who take the time to actually interact and do the relational building and the bonding end up being more productive and getting more done and being more efficient in less time. And so I think the research absolutely will show that if you just drive for productivity all the time and view connecting as a distraction, you're going to end up burning people out, and you're not going to be able to have them for as long, and they're not going to be as fresh and as creative and feel as connected to really show up and dive in. So I think the productivity research is going to show absolutely the better you're connected and the better you feel like you know each other and enjoy each other, the more you're going to get done.
So, from a business leader standpoint who's focused on growth, what's your advice for leveraging friendship to develop teams that aren't necessarily too cliquish either? That's another thing that I think I look at this different with different age groups. For example,
Hmm.
it's people that fall into a clique, but it could be any age group. It doesn't. This is not a way of labeling 20-year-olds, 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds. It could be any group that falls into that. We're in a much more diverse workplace with ages and genders and everything else now. What's your advice on how people really develop friendships, new friendships with teams that maybe don't look like them? Does that make sense?
Yeah. It's a beautiful question. I hear you speaking of the diversity and inclusion element. And I have a whole chapter on cliques and our fear
Yeah.
of being left out. And maybe this is a good time for us to talk about what the 3 requirements of all relationships are, because I think that would help give us context to answer those questions, if that's okay with
Yeah, of
you.
course.
So I mentioned one of them earlier. And so when I talk about the 3 requirements of relationship, what this is when we look at all the social science out there of what bonds people, what builds trust, what leaves us feeling closer to one person more than another. When we look at Google studying what makes for a team, and they call it psychological safety, and you look at the definition of that. When you look at people who are saying what makes you call that person your best friend and not that person, when you look at all of these scientists studying different things and using different words, I pulled all of that together and started grouping the words together and trying to break it apart. And I found these 3 common denominators that are in every single one of those studies. So that's what I'm referring to when I say the 3 requirements. One of them, as we mentioned earlier, is consistency. It's consistent time. It's putting in the time where we actually have the chance to interact regularly. That is what happens automatically for us at work. That's what makes work the number one place where we're making friends. It's not because we work with people, to your point, that are like the coolest people we'd ever meet or just people just like us necessarily. It's the people that we're just going to be seeing on a regular basis. And therefore, that's why we end up bonding with them, assuming the other two things then happen. The other two requirements are positivity, which means we need to end up enjoying each other. We need to feel more positive emotions than negative emotions. We need to feel good about being in each other's presence. And the third requirement is vulnerability. Vulnerability is how we feel known, how much we feel like we can share with each other, what we can disclose if I feel like you get me. And so basically, when you look at any healthy relationship, we can judge it by how well do you know each other, vulnerability, how much do you spend time together, consistency, and how much do you enjoy each other, positivity. And so most of our relationships, I mean, you can look back on any relationship in your life that's meaningful, and I can guarantee everybody listening that there's no relationship you have ever built that doesn't have those three things. And conversely, I could make the argument that any relationship right now that's not as meaningful as you want it to be is because at least one of these three things is lacking. So when we look at people who you were kind of mentioning, what if people aren't like us? What if there's a lot of diversity? What if you're on a team where it's not necessarily people who you feel like would be the people that you would become friends with? And that was one of my favorite chapters to write, is with a research. Our brains think that we need to have things in common with each other to be close, and the research does not bear that out. The research bears out that yes, commonality can help, assuming it helps you do those three things: feel better with each other, feel like you're safer and to share with each other, and feel like you can spend time with each other. So for example, you're not more likely to bond with somebody who has the same political views than you, interestingly enough, or who's also into marketing, unless that helps you both feel like you have safer things to talk about, that you both feel better about each other's the conversations, or it helps bring you together more frequently. And so this is where the commonality thing is super interesting, is that our brains tell us like, oh, I can't bond with those people because XYZ. And the truth of the matter is we have so many examples of people who bond and love each other who are completely opposite on the political spectrum, who have completely different careers, who are completely different ages, who have completely different races, who have completely different life experiences. We know bonding can happen. It's just our brains sometimes cut it short because we assume that if we don't have certain things in common that we can't bond with each other. And as long as we end up having those three things happen, it doesn't matter what we have in common, only that we end up feeling good around each other, we end up feeling seen around each other, and we end up feeling like we can trust each other. If those three things happen, it doesn't matter what else we have in
Yeah.
common.
Well, you see, I have the book close, so you will know that I've read this. That is chapters 5, 6, and 7, which were my next three chapters.
Wow, there you go.
So,
There
chapter
you go.
5, which dives into being positive, I think, which stood out to me at first, was I know so many people like to have relationship cultural type interviews now when they're interviewing new people that they bring on, and what that word you said was safe. It really is what makes people feel safe, not necessarily comfortable, enjoyable, but comfortable, safe to work with on environment. And I don't mean safe like dangerous, but safe, do they
Yeah,
share the same
accepted.
commonality? Because
Accepted.
people are often scared to have a diverse point of view. And that doesn't necessarily mean they have to have a diverse gender, background, political view, whatever, just a different point of view. And so one of the things that I really loved in there that you talked about in chapter 5, how to develop relationships that are at work that are positive, was how do we look, and I use this with a little bit of a social media lens as well, how do you look at something where positivity doesn't mean no negativity? That was what you said.
Yeah.
But we
Yep.
can
Yep.
reduce it. So
Yep.
how do
Yep.
you deal with that?
Yeah. So two things pop into my head that you're bringing up that are so great. One is that there's
You
a
should at least be
ratio.
impressed I remembered which chapters those were. So
I am impressed. Good job. Yeah, and so with the positivity ratio, what the scientists are studying that saying that healthy relationships need to stay 5 positive feelings for every negative feeling. So that's our ratio. So we want to make 5 deposits in every relationship for every withdrawal we make emotionally. So positivity, to your point, does not mean being positive or only agreeing with each other. It means leaving both people feeling okay and feeling accepted and feeling good. And that speaks to Google's research around psychological safety. If you start looking at the definition of psychological safety, it's really the ability to share something that's a harebrained idea or an opposing belief and know that we won't be punished by the group for having that idea. And so that's really important when we're talking about wanting to show up and And we're scared of sharing an open and a new idea if we're going to be shunned for it. And so what we need is these three requirements: positivity, consistency, and vulnerability need to keep working in tandem over and over and over together, so that it needs to feel good for me to want to share something. And then after I share something, it needs to feel good for me having shared that thing. And the more we repeat those consistently, the more we're going to create a culture that feels safe for doing those things. And so that's where it becomes really important, is it's not just these three things, it's these three things happening and repeating themselves over and over and over. There's what creates a culture or a team or a healthy relationship that we can trust or depend upon. So once you kind of share that idea that could be a little bit dissenting dissenting view, then it depends on how the rest of us respond to that, and then that gives you information as to whether that's safe to do again, or it gives you information of, okay, I need to try to do it a different way, so I need to practice doing this in a way that doesn't leave people feeling like I dumped on them or I judged them. And so what can I do to share this in a way where I'm still leaving them feeling good? So it really calls all of us to look and say, how do I share this in a way that leaves the other person feeling accepted, and I'm not trying to change them, I'm not trying to judge them? And how do I then do that gift back to you and say, thank you for sharing that, and do it in such a way where I tell you it's okay to do that? And so that's what we need in workplaces, is where we can start practicing healthy relationships that are leaving everybody feeling more positive emotions for having interacted. And the more we can do that, the safer it becomes for us to share those dissenting views. And
Yeah,
so that's where I was kind of, we should be training more for this, not talking about it less. We should be talking about it
agreed.
more.
Yeah,
Good
and that's
question.
that's advice for everybody to follow, me included, instead of just the other person is not the devil because they disagree with your point. But in chapter 6, you talked about developing relationships that are consistent, and part of that also, I know we unpacked a little bit of that, but you speak about proximity being part of the equation, as well as describe when you look at a more globally remote workforce today. Everybody's a little bit zoomed out, but I love that you did talk about prioritizing in person and video. How do we go about doing that to where we're not wearing people out on Zoom or making people scared to travel, or they're so busy they don't have time to spend in person, but it's so much better than doing everything virtually or by phone or things like that. There's so much that can get lost in translation from emails, from phone calls, and everything else. You sit two people down together, a cup of coffee, and the world is a lot better. But it's hard to do right now. So
It does feel hard to do. And I feel like our world, watching us go remote, we're now 44 some percent of us are working remote. And when you've got some 30% of us looking for work, that really is the majority of us are not working with people anymore. That puts about only about a third of us in essential working roles where we're interacting with people. So the most of us are having to build our relationships in a remote and virtual way right now, to a large degree. And I would argue that one of the things that we've done, when you pull back and you look at these three requirements of relationship, I think what we did collectively is really focus on that consistency piece. We put in the technology and the process of, okay, here's how we're doing meetings. Okay, here's how we're communicating. Okay, here's the channels, the Slack channels. Like, we really prioritize productivity, appropriately so, and put together all the mechanisms to keep us in touch with each other, to keep up the consistency. Unfortunately, what we did not do as well as is be as intentional to say, now, how are we raising the positivity of our people, and how are we increasingly helping them get to know each other and practicing vulnerability in safe ways during this time? So when you talk about people being burned out or zoomed out, I think it has a lot more to do with, because we are connected, but at the end of the day, we don't necessarily feel more seen, and we don't necessarily feel better for having those connections. And so we're lacking two of the other important elements here that we would be wise to say, um, how do we build these two things into our work lives? How do we make sure that in our meetings, what can we do during our meetings? What can we do during that Zoom? What can we do? What are we talking about during this video call? What are we doing? Whether it's in person, on the phone, or via video, we need to be asking, what am I doing to make sure that Kenneth feels more seen at the end of this conversation? What questions can I ask? How can I make sure that he feels like I'm seeing him and he's valuable? And how can I make sure that I leave him feeling better for having interacted with me? And if we were all doing that more, making sure that we are building that into our interactions, I think we would be seeing a lot less burnout and a lot more feeling of connected. And I've always argued that most of us, our loneliness is not a lack of interaction. I've always argued that some of the loneliest people are some of the most busy, networked, socially connected, in meetings all day, talking to customers all day, interacting all day. I have long argued that loneliness in most people now is not it's not from lack of isolation or for lack of just kind of having enough people. It's from lack of having intimacy. It's they don't go deep enough with the people they're already interacting with. They don't feel that seen. And that's where most of our loneliness is coming from. It's not because we just need to schedule more people. We need to go deeper with the people that we're scheduling.
Well, the best way to help Kenneth to feel seen is to follow me on Instagram or leave me a review on Apple Podcasts. So, chapter 7 talks about vulnerability. You know, a lot of people stay very guarded. And I thought this chapter was really interesting because you go about in an environment where people can take advantage of vulnerability. And it's hard enough for a lot of people to let down their guard, but with personal relationships where they feel they could get burned, but especially even in business. And it's hard at any level as people are, moving up the corporate ladder. That's where I was really thinking about people, in my earlier days, me included, who were probably more guarded with friends than we necessarily were with bosses. And I've made plenty of mistakes. So I'm happy to share those on a different show. But talk about how somebody opens themselves up without opening themselves up too much, I guess.
Yeah. So I teach these three requirements on a triangle. At the base of the triangle is positivity, and then the two arms going up both sides of the triangle is consistency and vulnerability. I teach that every relationship starts at the bottom of the triangle, and only as we practice these three things, though some relationships move up the triangle. So therefore, at the top of the triangle, only a few relationships will have practiced the highest levels of consistency, the highest levels of expressed positivity, and the highest levels of vulnerability to be up at the top of the triangle. And that is developed over time, over practicing these three things. So, what's really important to note about that is that when we're working with people, should be starting with, we have low levels of consistency at that point, and we should have low levels of vulnerability. And so, vulnerability is not something that's all or nothing. It's not, should I be vulnerable or should I not be vulnerable? It's what's appropriate to be vulnerable for this level of relationship right now. And if you think about vulnerability as like a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being like the most processing of your feelings and the most transparent and the least amount of filter, then it's not so much about not talking about a certain thing with somebody. It's about doing it in an appropriate way that recognizes this isn't somebody that you should be dumping on, and you haven't built the relationship to warrant this person being treated like you're at the top of the triangle when you're not. So to me, it's really important that you realize at work, this is probably a level, vulnerability should probably look like a level 3, level 4 on a scale of 1 to 10, perhaps, with this person on the team. And so what does that look like to share a mental health thing, or to share that you're going through a divorce, or to share what some of your dreams and goals are, or what your ideas are? And so how do you share that in a way that is is safe and guarded, and just kind of appropriately so that you're doing it a little bit at a time, and then you're seeing, are they responding in a way that leaves me feeling better with positivity? And if so, then I will go back to consistency and I will want to do it again, and as we spend more time together, we'll share a little bit more. And then if it still feels good, so you're creating a pattern, and so your vulnerability only goes up as your pattern invites it to go up incrementally, if that makes sense. Am
Mm-hmm.
I saying that in a
Mm-hmm.
way, like, I think so many people, we're lonely, and so if we just find a kind ear, we're just like, oh, and all of a sudden we're just like, oh, I see you every day, you're my new best friend, and we just kind of overshare and say too much, and we aren't really building a pattern and doing it in a way that leaves both people feeling safe. So it's really important to me, and I teach this really heavily in the book, to practice vulnerability in a way that's appropriate, that's incremental, that is slow, and that is practiced thoughtfully, and is only increased when consistency and positivity are also increased at the same time.
You added curiosity and to that as well in that whole
Yes.
in consistency, vulnerability, exploratory, curiosity, and positivity. Better memory than I thought. But you also talk about setting the goals, and the only thing I will say that I didn't like about the book was, this was a
Uh-huh.
silly personal one, was as I was reading it, it made me think too much, and that's a good thing. But I was like, oh my gosh, are my relationships, am I being friendly enough? You start asking these questions, and I didn't want to leave from it, I left in a really good place after reading it. You didn't write this to make it complex to where somebody would feel like they're not being enough of a friend, or but I'd like it at least help me and listeners understand, how do you set your own goals and expectations for this? Once you read it,
Hmm.
how do you go out and make it practical without spending too much time looking in the mirror, figuring out if you're confused or narcissistic or a little both?
No, it's a very thoughtful question. And I think, I think the goal is to help us all be a little more self-reflective and
Yeah,
self-aware, because a lot of us have just done relationships and we feel like we should just know this, right? And so then
exactly.
our immediate response is then to feel guilt, like, wow, why didn't I know this? And like, have I been doing this wrong? And we kind of like start worrying. And we need to kind of, I think it's a good space to kind of look and say, okay, wow, when I look at this triangle, where are my relationships, and which one of these three things do I not do as comfortably and as intentionally as the other ones, and where can I grow? And I think that is helpful, because most of us are experiencing loneliness and loneliness, I should just say, loneliness isn't a bad thing. Loneliness is your body telling you you need more connection than you're currently receiving. So much like your hunger tells you you need to eat food, loneliness tells you you need more love and you need that. So it's not something to feel shame about. What's wrong is if we don't identify that, or we don't know how to get that need met, then that's where it starts getting unhealthy and starts breaking down our bodies and our mental health, is because then you're basically like not getting enough food. And that's when you start having, starvation and malnourishment. And so, similarly, loneliness, as long as it tells you and kind of convicts you to say, okay, this is a need I need to pay attention to. And then you need to be able to say, and unfortunately, what so many people do then is then they feel bad because they don't know what to do about it. And hopefully, what I was trying to do with this book is, okay, here's what you can do about it. Like, start identifying a few people that you want to prioritize, that you matter to you, that you want to feel closer to. And now look at them and say, where do you think they honestly are on this triangle based on what you practice? How consistent are you with them, really? How vulnerable are you with them, really? How much do you practice leaving both of you feeling accepted and appreciated and loved and enjoyment? And like, what are you doing? Which of these could you improve to like help make your relationships feel better for you? And yeah, that is one of my really big goals. That's one of the things that I love, that a lot of people appreciate about my work, is I try to take all the science and break it down into the tiniest little steps, where it's just like, okay, here's how to get started with this. And I don't want anyone feeling bad. This is a
No,
cultural,
no.
I'm really big on saying this is not a flaw of you personally if you feel this way. We systemically feel this way. Most of us feel this way. So clearly we're doing something wrong collectively with the way we've oriented our lives. And the best we can do now, I mean, we still have to put in our 40 to 60 hours a week. We live in a world where we still aren't just being gifted all this amazing extra time to go connect and sit on the front porch proverbial and talk to our friends. So given all of that, what can we each individually do to try to get our needs met in the most meaningful way, was really my highest goal in writing
Yeah, well, it didn't unpack any demons for me, and obviously
this.
I'm not suffering from any loneliness from food, but it was one of those ones that this is a book that hits at the core, and there's a lot of I read a lot of books. Shelves you can't virtually see behind me are filled with them, but a lot of them I don't necessarily ask questions after, and I thought this did a really good
Mm,
job of making you think of where to apply it, not just in your own life, but where do you apply it at work as well. And that's where I thought,
hmm.
eh,
Well, that
both for
means a
somebody
lot.
that's managed people as well as you think about it. Going back to friends real quick, and this kind of touched on something you briefly mentioned earlier. I'm kind of curious, would you ever hire a best friend?
Absolutely. I would absolutely. I think when you look at the research, it is the things that we're most afraid of. I'll back that up. I'll say the things we're most afraid of are things that if we actually had more conversation around and we actually said this is what we know is good for a business, now let's put as many safeguards into place as possible to help protect against the things that could go wrong. I would then say you have a higher level of responsibility if you're going to work with a friend or hire a friend, to go higher on the triangle and actually have harder conversations. And I'm really big in the book. I give a whole list of questions that I think if you're going to be somebody's boss, if you're going to work together, you owe it to yourselves to say, let's have those conversations. What's the worst thing that could happen by us working together? And what would you want me to do in a situation if I felt like you weren't doing this? And how would you want me to handle this? And I feel like could be a bonding process. And I absolutely would hire a friend. Would
Yeah,
you?
I have before, and some have been great examples, and some have been mistakes as well. Yeah, it was an interesting learning process. But I think there's always the difference of people you bring in that are friends prior into a business
Hmm.
versus the ones that you can quickly build relationships while at a job. So, a little of both. I don't know that there's always a good side to bringing in somebody from externally that's a close-ish friend, but I always know there's a positive of building that kind of relationship and friendship while with somebody new at a job. Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
I did a lot of interviews for this book, and most of the ones I heard were people who hired a friend were like, we were able to do so much more in the business
Oh yeah,
right away, right off the bat, because we trusted each other and we just knew each other had our back and we didn't have to take the time to get to know each other. Or we were able to like
absolutely.
just go
Real
in and take bigger risks
conversations.
because, yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, I think there's so many advantages. That's not to say, I mean, it'd be like asking, is it, I mean, there's always going to be scenarios where it could go bad because we've got people, we've got people, and we can get our feelings hurt and we can have all kinds of things. But it absolutely, the research bears out that you are so much better off loving the people you work with, and that
Absolutely.
you will do your job better and your health will be better for it. So yeah, I think it's worth the risk. We just need to also take on the responsibility of having the really big questions and making sure we have good conversations and set good boundaries and set healthy expectations and show up with more transparency. And so I think we just also have to bring the responsibility piece with it and talk about that more.
Well, let's dive into the really important questions now. So,
Okay.
what is your favorite movie of all time? I mean, you
Oh my
live in one
goodness,
of the
my
most
favorite
beautiful cities
movie.
in the world where many movies have been cast.
Yes. Um. Oh, I'm
These are
blanking.
the
The
tough
Thomas Crown.
questions. Uh,
Thomas Crown Affair is my favorite
Thomas
movie.
Crown Affair, the new one,
Oh, is there
the
a new one?
the Pierce Brosnan one.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's not new anymore, right? I've
Well,
been
yeah,
watching that one forever. It's so
yeah.
good.
It's so funny that I can ask somebody that's done a ton of research for a book. You ask them a tough question like a movie, and they you get a more off the cuff answer. So no, Thomas Crown and Rene Russo. Yeah.
Yes. I mean, you've got love, you've got action, you've got mystery. It's a good one.
Shasta, I do ask this of all my guests. I must ask you, what is your favorite kind of shark and why?
Oh wow. Well, there's a white shark, and I just think it's beautiful. I just think it's like mysterious and just gorgeous. So I'm drawn to it. It just has that appeal.
And everybody always thinks that San Francisco Bay is full of them. They're not. Although there was one seen in 2019, it was all over the news getting a seal. But
Yep.
that's one of the myths that so many people believe there were so many man-eating sharks outside of Alcatraz. And I used on my own website talked a little bit about the myth that people thought there were man-eating sharks there, and that's what discouraged a lot of the prisoners from leaving. But
Yeah.
that was just
Yep.
something
Alcatraz.
perpetrated by the guards to scare the people from swimming, even though they could still drown and get hypothermia in that cold water. But well, Shasta, it's a special time of show. Are you ready for the 5 most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Oh yes, those weren't two of them.
No, well, those were the prequels to these.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm warmed up then. I'm ready.
So this is a question that I need an explanation for because I love your name. How did you get? I mean, obviously I know how you got your name, Shasta, but was there an origin behind it?
So my mom and her boyfriend in high school watched a foreign film and they don't remember the name of it. And they said that someday they were going to have a child and name her Shasta.
Wow.
Then my mom got shipped off to school and was married a different man, my dad. And I was supposed to be Amy Rochelle. And then her friend was pregnant and named her baby Amy Rochelle because she didn't have a name for her baby at the hospital. So she was born 2 months before me, Amy Rochelle. And then my mom didn't have a name for me. So she went back to the
That's
name
awesome.
that she had chosen with her high school sweetheart. And I am now the love
I'm
child
sure
name
your dad
of two
loves
people.
that too. Yeah. If he's
Well, you
listening to
ask
this
my dad how I
podcast,
got
I'll
how I,
fast
you
forward
ask him how I
30
got my
seconds.
name, and he'll just say, "I just liked the name."
Yeah,
I don't
yeah.
think he knows the background.
Well, then that will be an obvious transition into this first question. Shasta Cola or Shasta root beer?
Yeah.
Because I remember Shasta Pop.
Yes,
What's your favorite
Shasta root beer
flavor?
all the way.
Good,
Root beer all the way.
wonderful answer.
And that was my first and only time at the principal's office was giving autographs on the playground in fifth grade for. We just all believed I must be president of the soda company.
That would be a wonderful prop for every keynote presentation you give is to walk up, drink it on stage, and then autograph some Shasta Cola when you leave and say, "This is what I give you." So number 2. Another friend's question. Matthew Perry as Chandler Bing or David Schwimmer as Ross Geller? I could go Monica or Rachel, but I didn't want to go there.
Yeah. So what's the question? Which one is what?
Chandler or Ross?
Ross all the way.
Okay. I didn't like Friends that much anyway. I was a Seinfeld guy, but that's another story. All right, which is a more friendly social platform to you? I know you're on all the channels, but Facebook or Instagram? Since we touched on
Ah,
social media a little bit, and Twitter's just too
ah.
nasty anyway, especially in a political year. So
I love both, but I would go Facebook because I feel like you can have a little bit more conversation there.
100%.
And that's a really important part of connecting and bonding and being seen. So I would go there.
Yeah, I prefer Instagram, but Facebook for friendships or for
Hmm.
just conversations and Messenger and everything else. But the winner
Yeah.
is actually TikTok. The silliest channel is my favorite. So, number 4, a friendship bracelet or a friendship necklace?
Well, I'm wearing a friendship necklace. Actually, I have
Perfect.
four other friends all wearing the matching one. So I'm going necklace.
No, not bad. I used to get all these friendship bracelets when I lived in Brazil. Those little cloth ones that were tie on forever,
Yep, yep, yep,
and
yep.
that was when we were surfing. But that was now everybody's got one. So number 5, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread.
Cornbread with butter and honey.
Nice. So Shasta, where can people find out more about you? Get a copy of the book. Hopefully, see you on a stage delivering a keynote presentation soon, and more.
Well, ShastaNelson.com is where the kind of the hub for everything. But the businessoffriendship.com is where you can find out all about the new book and order it from any place of your choosing. And plus, on the businessoffriendship.com, anybody who orders the book, that's where we also have a toolkit for managers and teams. And so I have like all kinds of extra resources. I have sharing questions for teams on there. I have
Yeah,
videos
it's a
for
good
teams to
website.
watch and discuss, all of that stuff. So that's a free toolkit at the businessoffriendship.com.
Have you ever run into anybody else named Shasta? I know we were talking, we were connected before. There were other Shasta
Once.
Nelsons on Skype, or you
Yes,
have?
I was in an exercise class 2 years ago where I walked in and they said, "You're going to be Shasta in because we have another Shasta today." And my brain was like, "What?" Like I've never been gone by my last
Yeah.
initial. So we hugged afterwards and we were like, "Oh
Yeah,
my
I'm sure
word!"
you were the
Neither of us
friendlier
have ever met
Shasta.
another one.
So, well, Shasta, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Thank you for having me and
And
thank you for the good work, good stuff you're putting out in this world, inspiring people. It means a lot.
I appreciate it. So there was my conversation with Shasta Nelson, a keynote speaker, leading expert on friendship and healthy relationships at work, and author with her third book now out called The Business of Friendship, Making the Most of the Relationships Where We Spend Most of Our Time. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with her. First, seriously, when you think of every job you've ever had, there have been bad moments, and who do you turn to other than your friends? Having friends at work may seem obvious, but the business impact with fewer sick days, a lower price tag, without having to replace so many employees, just being more productive, it all makes so much business sense, especially for leaders to foster. But that usually gets overlooked because it seems either obvious or too fluffy from an HR standpoint. But with every job I've ever left, I could say that what made me want to consider staying at that job was the bonds that I've built. I wish I'd even taken more time to maximize those relationships. I still can. That's what friends are for. At least that's what Stevie and Elton say it anyway. But seriously, just take a moment to really think about how much productivity and financial impact those friendships can have on you and you on them. Second, I read so many books and publications on business leadership, SEO to PPC, customer experience to customer service, and so on. We often look inward at what we learn for ourselves, and we should, but we should also take a moment to focus on the people you work with, developing those friendships, and learn how to interact with them better. Develop better friendships, if you will, is also a productivity enabler. Think of it as a personal growth hack, and it's a good reason to pick up this book. A lot of it seems so obvious, and then when you really start diving deeper, you'll develop a better appreciation. At least my type A shark brain did. Third, just an idea, but look at making friends with people that don't necessarily look just like you. She gives great points on vulnerability, positivity, and consistency, and that's 3 of the ways that are going to help you develop those. Work on those 3 points in your relationships with people to make those relationships a lot more productive. After all, you interact with these people every day. But unfortunately, a lot of people narrow that community of friends. We see a lot of commonality, cliques, if you will, and culture fit type interviews today. And I find that a bit disturbing. Being able to get along with people is obviously hard to measure, and so we do the best we can. But people are often scared as well to create friendships or develop trust in something that looks figuratively in a way different. You may think you feel safe, but I'm a firm believer in diversity of thought carrying you much further in any relationship as well as in business. And it opens your mind to look at things from a different perspective, like a shark's perspective. So be friendly with everyone anyway, but really open up your mind and do not just constrain yourself just in what's a common security blanket of friendships and ideas. You got to let go of your emotional whoopee. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you again for the privilege of your time. Seriously, you're being a friend of mine just by listening, and I hope as your friend I've inspired you a little today to be friendlier too. A friendlier shark, if you will. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.